the muted. You just get muted. Get muted. Yeah, that's what they want.
Council President, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. And we're doing the countdown to go live.
Okay.
Just waiting for a text from Hartford Public Access.
All right.
Chief Todi, can you hear me?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yes. So they're doing a countdown right now. In 4 minutes, we'll be live, okay?
Okay. Sounds good.
Wonderful. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too, kinda. Virtually still.
Yes. Wonderful. We're doing a countdown. So I was just informed by Hartford Public Access that at 8:50 p.m. we will be live.
Sounds good.
Evening, Chief.
Hello.
Hey, Chief.
There it is. Councilman Gale. I think that was Councilman Sanchez that I heard first, but my
No,
screen
you
is,
did. You did, Chief.
Yes, it was.
sorry. You're for some reason, Councilman Sanchez, your picture doesn't pop up when you talk, but Councilman
no?
Gale's did.
Okay.
Oh, there you go. There you go. You'd think we would have this down pat by now, right? For
Right.
almost 3 years.
Okay, I'm just going to ask for the moment of silence until we go live. Thank you.
I'm just going to close our door.
Okay. Yes. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for being here with us. We are coming back from our 15-minute break to listen to our last presentation for this evening through the Operations Management Committee meeting. And now we have the presentation from the Hartford Police Department. With that said, Chief Todi, you have the floor.
Thank you, Council President, and thank you, members of Council, for making this virtual for me so that I could be part of this presentation. I appreciate it. I know most of them were done in person, which I'm anxious to get back to in person as well. So I know you've had a couple presentations already. I have a Hartford team back in Hartford that's also on here virtually. Lieutenant Laura Trzynski, Assistant Chief Kenny Howell, Deputy Chief Dustin Rendock, and they will interject if they have anything to add or if we have any questions that are technical in nature that they're better off answering than me. We'll go ahead into the first slide, Laura. So our mission statement, mission of Hartford Police Department is to keep Hartford residents safe by responding to and investigating crimes, reducing crime, and by forging strong relationships between police officers of all ranks and the communities they serve. Building a police force that reflects the diversity of Hartford is part of the department's commitment to build relationships with those it serves. The department strives to fulfill its obligations while maintaining the highest professional and ethical standard. And that's probably the only slide that I'll read verbatim, but I think that's important. Next slide. So this is our organizational chart, kind of simplified so it fits on the screen and everybody can see it. From the chief at the top, 2 assistant chief positions, 1 Kenny Howell, who is there right now. He's in charge of administration and professional standards, and the position vacated by Assistant Chief Medina, which is the Assistant Chief of Operations. That position is still vacant as of right now. Under them are deputy chiefs. You have Deputy Chief Sonia Watson all the way to the left of my screen. She oversees Patrol and Community Services Bureau. Deputy Chief Dustin Rendock oversees administration. And both of those typically report to the Assistant Chief of Administration and Professional Standards, which is Assistant Chief Kenny Howell. But for today, Assistant Chief Kenny Howell also has the Deputy Chief of Professional Standards, which is Deputy Chief Jason Lee, and the Deputy Chief Ian Powell of Investigative Services. I'm sorry, this org chart is a little bit bifurcated. So the Deputy Chief of Investigative Services, Ian Powell, and the Deputy Chief of Patrol both report to the Assistant Chief of Operations, which is the currently vacated Assistant Chief positions. They're kind of on opposite ends of the org chart in this picture, which is a little confusing. And then down below them, there are captains in each one of the respective areas, lieutenants that report to them. If there's any specific questions on further down the org chart, I'd be glad to take them at the end. Next slide. Department demographics. So as we look at the demographics, we have, as you can see in the center of the screen, that talks about all of our male and female officers broken down by race and ethnicity, white, black, Hispanic, Asian, and the percentages under them. We have a total number of racial and ethnic minorities in the department of 124. That is 33.24% of the department. And then our female percentage is at 14.48% right now. That's a total of 54 females. So right now we're at 373 officers. That leaves us with also 100 officer vacancy. Next slide. So as everyone kind of knows, here and across the country, we are faced with low staffing numbers in the police department. As I said, we're currently at 373. This is a net decrease of 34 officers since this time last year, which seems like a significant number, but that number kind of ebbs and flows based on graduation of academy classes. So as soon as we graduate an academy class, as you can imagine, our numbers will boost, by 15 to 20 officers. And then as attrition catches up to that over the months, we have found ourselves in the last couple of years kind of going up and down like that. It's reflected in the budget book. As we think we're getting ahead of the curve, officers retire, officers go to other departments. So we have fluctuated really between this 370 number and somewhere in the neighborhood of 380 up to 390 number for the last 18 months to 2 years for sure. Most of the officers that are leaving, we know are going to work for other law enforcement agencies. That's why we've worked very diligently to try to address some of the concerns that you heard in other presentations about aligning yourself with other police departments in wages and benefits and things like that. This is a contract year, so hopefully the administration, myself, and the union come to an agreement to present to council that gives our officers a contract that keeps them here. Most of our officers who resign have less than 5 years. That's 63% of the people that leave. Obviously, those challenges lead to burnout. They lead to high overtime costs. They lead to having to order people in. We'll see in the presentation later, we've had to take some strides to try to mitigate all of those factors. They lead to, all of the gains that we made in our efforts to put walk beats out there. We haven't been able to maintain those. So that it has a lot of impact on the police department for sure. It's really our number one focus right now when it comes to internal policing, obviously combined with some of the crime issues that we've seen across the country and in the city as well. As of for 2022, we went over this already. Our total sworn racial and ethnic minority is at 33.24% and 14.48% female. Next slide. So these specific demographics did not get into the slide presentation, but I will provide them by email. There were some emails going back late last night to try to get them into the slide presentation, but unfortunately they didn't get in there. So Academy Class 2021-1, we put in 2 classes that started in 2021. They graduated in December of 2021. That was a 45.5% racial and ethnic minority class and a 22.7% female. And I know I'm throwing percentages out. Like I said, I will provide this in an email so you can actually see it. But that was 9 white males, 1 black male, 4 Hispanic males, 2 Asian males, 3 white females, 2 Hispanic females, for a total of 45.5% minority and 22% female. The second class down is the one 2021-2. They have an anticipated graduation date of May 13th, which is, unless something goes horribly sideways, which is coming up. That class has 61.5% racial and ethnic minorities and 15.4% females. So a little higher percentage of racial and ethnic minorities, a little lower percentage of females in that class. That's 12 folks here at the HPD Academy and 1 at the New Britain PD Academy. So next slide, this is I'm not going to regurgitate everything on this slide. These are our crime numbers. They are available online. They are available every month in our public ComStat. We usually give very specific details on this at the Public Safety Committee meeting as well. So I think that these are the percentages that sometimes put folks to sleep. So I'm not going to read all of them. Generally speaking, overall, we're sitting at about a 17% decrease in overall crime this year. This is the kind of warning about the numbers. As last year we ended in a 21% overall crime decrease, but as we know, it was a 36% increase in homicides. We had decreases in just about every other category. But unfortunately, the most significant one is homicides. That's one we watch the closest. That's the one we work the hardest on. And that one was up from 2021 compared to 2020. This year, when you look at the bottom of that slide, bottom half of that slide, you look at a 66.7% increase in homicide. But a week later, it is at 22.2%. So when we're early in the year and when we're dealing with crime categories that may only have, 7, 8, 9 in the number, short periods of time can swing percentages significantly. We track these percentages. I know a lot of people, especially in council, don't like to hear the stats, but that's really how, we're an intelligence-driven police department. That's really how we gauge what we're doing. But on the bottom of that slide, when this slide was presented, was put together, that was the number, right? We had 6 homicides in 2021 and 10 in 2022, which was a 66.7% increase. Our last CompStat reporting period, which is the period that will be presented this week, last year was up to 9. So there was 3 in that short period of time versus 11. We only had 1 in that short period of time in this year, which brought the increase down substantially. So that's where we kind of look at these numbers. What are we doing about those? You look at, like I said, the CompStat package is a good place to kind of see what are the numbers that are concerning. Obviously, homicide numbers. So homicide arrests, we were at 6 homicide arrests at this time last year in 2021. We're at 15 this time in 2022. That's a 150% increase in homicide arrest. So when you're having an issue and you're focused as a department, those are the increases that we're looking for in those problem areas. Burglaries were up this year. There was, again, in this particular slide, it's showing 54%. In the slide in the CompStat reporting period that would be reported this week, it's down to 45% because there was a pattern burglar that we arrested, and those numbers decrease. So sometimes the impact of the officers can be seen in short periods of time. Same thing with burglary arrests. We were at 35 arrests this time last year. We're at 65 this time this year. That's an 85.7% increase in a crime category that we're up in. These officers are going out there. I can't say enough about them, how they're responding to these problems, right? Last year, we talked significantly as a city about auto theft and the issues around auto theft and how they were a nexus to gun violence and a nexus to other issues we were having with the city. So last year, this time we had made 11 auto theft arrests. This year, this time 72. That's a 554% increase in auto theft arrests at this point this year compared to this point last year. A lot of that is because of that 11 town auto theft task force that we put together towards the end of last year that has been continued out into this year. They've done tremendous work. These are all areas that we are focused on. This year to date, 131 guns seized, 23 of those ghost guns. Last year, this time, 91 seized, 40 less. Only 6 ghost guns. So we're seeing a significant increase in these ghost guns, and they're on our radar, and they're something that we're focusing on. But that's 10 additional guns we've been taking off the streets every month so far this year. Shot spotter activations are down 37%. So we are seeing improvements in the areas that we are focusing on, and that is really, I can go into more details if there's questions, but that is really the focus of our crime reduction efforts. Next slide. Expansion of the body-worn camera and dashboard camera program. We purchased these additional body-worn cameras. So now every sworn individual in the department has a camera. We adjusted the body-worn camera policy to come in line with the statewide statute, the Police Accountability Bill, otherwise known as the Police Accountability Bill. Additional vehicle cameras also had to be purchased for in-car cameras to come into alignment with the Police Accountability Bill. So we are up to date with all those efforts. We are having some supply chain issues getting in some of the computers and the computer mounts for the cars to get those cameras actually mounted in the cars. But we anticipate that we will be in compliance well before this. We started this knowing it was coming. That was a $215,000 undertaking that we had to do, to come into compliance with that statute. Next slide. The summer initiative. I talked a little bit about the public safety at the public safety meeting earlier this month. Last month it was at this point. We talked about that plan of action to address not just violent crime, but the other things that we see, quads, ATVs, pop-up parties, some of those issues. That plan is already in place. It includes both uniformed units, detective units. It includes our federal partners, our state partners, as I said, our regional partners with the Auto Theft Task Force. They've helped out on several issues that go beyond auto theft that impacted their communities as well as ours. They've been a tremendous resource, and that expands into the community as well. We've got, Mothers United Against Violence. We've got Compass Peace Builders. We've got OPP in there. Peace Centers of Connecticut. There's a whole bunch of community groups that we partner with and that we have plans to continue to work with into the summer. As we know, as the warm weather hits, sometimes some of these issues increase in frequency, and we want to get ahead of that curve. So that is a plan that basically went into place on May 1st. And that'll be our mantra now for going into summer. And unless something else pops up, we've seen some different things come up in past years that have surprised us a little bit, but we are certainly well prepared to deal with it. Post-COVID return of special events, a lot of them we all know about. Traffic Division and Special Events is well prepared for those. We also know we've got events like Domingo that are new, where streets will be closed. We're prepared to staff that. We work closely with the mayor's office to make sure that we can properly staff these things with our numbers where they are. Worked with the union as well. They've been a partner to make sure that we can that all these things go off without a hitch and we can get things back to normal and back to in person. Next slide. Community outreach team is kind of an expansion of some of the things that we've had, some of the ideas and things that we've had in place before. This is a lieutenant and right now 2 officers, but we're looking to expand it again with the number where we are. I don't want to pull too many officers out of patrol. But this team works with faith-based groups. This is your Officer Barrett that works with the homeless community. We're expanding that into other kind of underserved populations that may be out there that we can assist with or mitigate, crime issues that come up as part of them. These are the folks that, primarily deal with the panhandlers and things like that, along with our community service officers. But this is kind of a dedicated team to work with faith-based folks and really take a collaborative effort to try to reduce some of these things. These officers have been organizing some of the gun violence walks. They organized the Faith in Blue Community Weekend. That was a great event. This is the group that converted the box truck into Officer Barrett and the homeless outreach team's truck that has all the supplies, PPE when the people needed it, toiletries, things like that. So that is our community outreach team. We just repurposed an SUV that's got a nice logos on it. You'll probably see it out and about, and that's what that team is all about. Next slide. Our UAS or drone program has been a great success so far. We have 4 personnel that have gone through the entire FAA course to become licensed pilots. We've had a lot of successful stories from finding missing people to locating some of these homeless encampments where, conditions are not great, and we're getting resources out to these folks sometimes when they're off the beaten path in places where we can't find them. The Hartford Marathon, the drones are a big asset in some of these special events where we can see where traffic is going, where pinch points are, and try to keep things as normal as we can during some of these larger events where traffic issues and pedestrian safety issues become important. They're a force multiplier because we can see things that we just can't see on a normal basis. We've used it for numerous auto theft operations. It's a lot safer for our officers. It's a lot safer for the community if we can, take these cars into custody and recover these vehicles in a safe way. And we're not out there, in vehicle pursuits and foot pursuits and other things like that. We've used them for fatal accident scenes, crime scenes, fire department assists. The list kind of goes on and on. It is a very, the policy is out there on our website. We went through a lot of vetting for this. I know there was always some concerns about privacy. There is an extensive process. We have to get an FAA number every time these drones go up. They do not just drive around up there. They are mission specific. They're out there for specific events. They're not just up there, kind of watching everybody moving around. That's just not what they're there for. They fly for about 30 minutes at a time. That's about their capacity, unless we tether them for something like the marathon or something like that, where they can sit in one place for a little bit longer of a period. But they have to register flight plans just like anybody else would. It is quite an undertaking, but I think it has brought a lot of successes here, especially in some of the issues that we kind of were scratching our head about with quads and ATVs and stolen vehicles that don't like to stop for the police and things like that. That's really where Senator Fonfara's, vision was with this program. And I think, the folks here at C4 have hit it out of the park. Next slide. Project Longevity, newly embedded project coordinator. We've just started really to hit the ground running with that in the beginning of this year. Already the first call-in scheduled. We're hoping to see a lot of good things with that, working with our federal and state prosecutors, parole and probation, everybody, all the pieces of that Project Longevity that really are required to make it work. The carrot and the stick and the pulling levers and everything that goes with Project Longevity is starting to get back to normal from COVID. So we're hoping to have some successes there. The climate study recommendations progress, we are due to have the full 2-year report for that in August. 64% are currently in place, 27% are in the implementation process, 5 are either not actionable or outside of HPD's control, and 4% is really where we're sitting at issues that are still yet to be implemented. And a lot of those are working groups and things that we were just kind of holding off on because of COVID, and they were really about people getting together and doing things. And that was something that, we kind of thought would be prudent to hold off on. Although some of that stuff was being done by Zoom, just like this. Obviously the partnership with the Heart team, everybody knows the successes of that so far. We're hoping to continue in those successes with Capital Region Mobile Crisis, the Wheeler Clinic, working with ES&T on getting officers out to the calls they need to be and making sure they're not at the calls we don't want them to be. We've provided ride-alongs, training, radio demeanor training. We've had some really good successes recently with some co-responses where individuals, really responded well to the team approach. So that has been a great success, and I'm sure will continue to be. As more stats and things are available on that, we will be getting them out. Next slide, Laura. So this is our policy update on accreditation. We've been talking about accreditation for a long time, but it becomes very cumbersome. Every time we think we've got it covered, something else happens. We had to go from a non-overnight detention facility to an overnight detention facility because the marshals weren't picking people up as often as they were before. They go every 3 days now. The marshals come and get people from our detention facility and bring them over to court to the holding facility. So once we held people overnight on a routine basis, we had to go into feeding people and making sure that there were blankets and places to sleep that were also couldn't be used to harm either each other or oneself while they're in detention. So it really changed a lot of the standards for us and almost made us operate, as a quasi-correctional facility, and we had to fall under some of those categories. But the good news is the mock assessment is scheduled for late this month, and the actual full post-assessment to get us Tier 1 accreditation is scheduled for June 30th. That really kind of had to be scheduled after I returned. So that will be, we will have good news for that hopefully right after the beginning of next budget year. But we have the benefit of actually Laura, who is our lieutenant in planning and accreditation, put together a lot of these slides, who is also a mock assessor. So she goes to other departments, she's done the training, and she does mock assessments for other police departments. And she thinks we're in pretty good shape. So I've been given, a lot of confidence for her that we should be good to go. So we're hoping for some good news after June 30th, post the accrediting body post will probably not meet to give us the thumbs up until fall. It's just the way their schedules go. But again, hope to have good news on that in short order. Next one. Strategic initiatives. Obviously continuing to reduce Part 1 crimes. We're still trying to get, a handle on the crime increases that we saw, in the last 18 months to 2 years. That was something that happened across the nation. The ability to have these stats showed that our officers did a good job of holding it at bay compared to other places, but it's still been a significant issue that the community has had to deal with. It's been very damaging here and elsewhere, and that remains a focus of ours. Also, continuing to try to maintain all of the services that we provide as a police department with 100 officers short. We've been in this situation before. It requires a lot of kind of outside the box thinking, changing the way we do order-ins, changing the way we do holdovers, changing the way we approve days off, trying to find, motivation for officers to work at least a few overtimes a week so that a small percentage of our officers are not taking on a large percentage of the workload. Try to even it out while we're still covering all the good special events that are coming back into the city. That's important for us too. Seeking higher levels of accreditation, we'll get past that June 30th date, and then we'll be looking at going for either there's 3 tiers of state accreditation, tier 1, 2, and 3. We will make a decision after we do the accreditation process in June if we are going to go to tier 2 and 3 state accreditation, or if we're going to jump directly to CALIA. Those are conversations that a lot of departments are having, and we will have that one as well. We have an RFP out there for a company to do the mental health wellness checks that came out of the police accountability bill. Again, this act had a lot in it, things that we had to, kind of navigate, the drug testing, pre-recertification. We've just gotten through that. It was hard to find vendors out there because every department in the state was dealing with a lot of the same stuff. But we got a vendor. We got everybody through that needed to get through, and all of our officers are well on their way to recertification, getting through that. Obviously, continuing to build and leverage relationships. Again, it all comes down to staffing. I think we had some great leverage when we had 24 walk beats out there, and we were really out in the public. The folks are out there on the bicycles. We will see that again this summer. But it won't be as robust as we've seen it in the past. These are important things, and we'll continue to do them, but we have to make sure that when the phone rings and somebody dials 911, that that the staffing is there to respond to that. That's obviously our priority. So grants and other funding opportunities, this year we got the first competitive grant that we've gotten in a long time. And that was the innovation grant from the Department of Justice on the non-fatal shooting team. Huge success. Just short of $500,000, $499,000, 3-year grant. What an impact that had. We went from 17 total arrests for non-fatal shootings in 2020 to 59 last year. Those are all people that pulled the trigger and hit a member of the community. And that is something that we need to focus on, and we did. So far this year, they have 10 arrests, 2 arrest warrants, and 2 pending, 2 arrest warrants pending in court. So they're already up to 14 this year, when we had 17 total in 2020. So we've talked about the Citizens Police Academy for a while now. We are absolutely going to do that, but COVID 100% put a damper on it. So when it's safe to get that back up and running, we've already got a plan in place. There's going to be kind of a give and take. Folks are going to get CPR certified that come into the program. They're also going to learn a bunch about the criminal justice system, firearm safety, patrol procedures, how we come up with policies, what our policies are, ride-alongs, and hopefully just bridge that gap of understanding between us and the community. Next. So this is the budget comparison financials. We are essentially up 3.4% total. Last year's totals with grant and general fund were at 50 million. This year it's at 51.7. You've got essentially that's your payroll increases for the most part. That's the biggest piece of it. We also have some hiring for some civilian support staff in there, crime analysts to come into full compliance with the FBI crime reporting for NIBRs, and a new administrative assistant for FOI. FOIs have doubled and tripled with body-worn cameras, and that's really something that a lot of departments that have gone to these camera systems have seen. An admin clerk for the Chiefs complex. We haven't had one in quite some time, and there's just a lot of volume that goes through there, and we're having sworn people do a lot of these functions that they can't do. So there's a couple new civilian positions in there, but generally speaking, that increase was an increase in payroll. And that one grant, Laura, if you want to go back, that 1.8 in the grant section is the COPS funding grant that we got for 10 officers. The Justice Innovation Grant is not shown there yet because that money hasn't come in yet. So some areas of focus, budget highlights. We're looking to do 2 police recruit classes, one for 25 and a second one for 25 in next fiscal year. Obviously, we're still continuing to work on minority recruitment, as you heard from the percentages in the 2 classes. We are continuing to move in the right direction, retaining, promoting qualified females and racial minorities is important. We signed on to the 30 by 30 pledge, which is basically that we're looking for police recruit classes of at least 30% by the year 2030. It's departments can sign on, they give you a bunch of information, and we have signed on to that pledge, and we'll continue to move in that direction. There is an increase in the overtime budget, and that is kind of offset by our higher attrition numbers, but we know that with less officers, we will spend more overtime to fill the same level of services. Next. I talked about these already. These are the civilian positions that we added, and FOI and records is a promotional position. Freedom of information is a new position. Patrol vehicles and motorcycles are reflected in this budget. We had some significant issues with the fleet and getting cars in the last year, just like the general public. There's no exception for police vehicles. We've had a tough time getting these cars in. We've had a tough time getting the cars that we have fixed. And we had some necessary computer hardware upgrades as well. 6 tough books for the cruisers because you need the tough book laptop computers to make the cameras work. 50 additional desktop computers, and some software that goes along with those. And I think that's it for the presentation. And I can open it up to questions.
Chief, if they can close the presentation.
You want it back up again?
Actually, no, closed up so that I can see everyone on the screen.
Oh, closed, I'm sorry.
Yes. So first of all, let me say, excellent presentation, very detailed. You answered some of the questions that I had already through your presentation. So I am going to open it up to my council colleagues for questions. Does anyone have any questions for the chief? Any questions or comments for the chief? Councilman Mishtam.
So much. I was waiting to see if someone else would go. I didn't want to jump ahead. Good evening, Chief.
Good evening.
I want to say first condolences for your dad.
Thank you. I
appreciate your work in dealing with our annoying selves. I wanted to start asking about the SMART team. I know you've supported it, and I guess it goes along with thing I've heard you say a lot of times, that your officers are called on to do a lot of things that are sort of not really what they're trained for. And I guess I know that the SMART team is sort of just getting started, and it's just a little bit, but I want to get a sense of what your insight is into what are the things that officers are still doing right now that the SMART team could eventually pick up, and also other things that maybe are not in their wheelhouse. I mean, I'm trying to think of things you've mentioned before, obviously like mental health triage is like the most obvious. I guess if you could just tell me some of the other sort of broad categories that you see really on the regular where there's not like a public safety risk, but it's like they're the ones who get called.
Yeah, I mean, the Hart, I think you're referring to the Hart team.
Yes.
And that is, I think that was probably, as we've seen, a lot of officer, and you and I've talked about it. I've talked about it with a lot of people, mental illness and police officers' response to mental illness, is something that was certainly the priority. Like, this was something that was causing people to get hurt. It was causing, uses of force. not through a lot of well-intended officers were out there with just not the tools to do the job correctly. And when they did do the job correctly, it was a Band-Aid approach. This Hart team has been great. Having it expanded to juveniles has been great. It's been embraced with open arms by the police officers. I think most officers were just maybe concerned about, some of the Hart team members' safety, but we have, with the help of Director Webster and ES&T and others, we have been able, I think, to really get it down pat pretty quickly. Our officers are not being dispatched to some of those calls, and they are being dispatched to some of the ones that the Hart team needs assistance with, but they're working together, and they might just kind of, hang around the corner. They might not be the first thing that someone who's in crisis sees is a police officer with a car with lights on it and a cage in the back and a gun. So I think it's a great example of a success. I think other areas that, I think there's a lot that goes along with, substance abuse, a lot that goes along with homelessness. And those three things are so interconnected. I would like to see a way to respond to things like that, that didn't involve police officers all the time. Jimmy Bear does a great job with his homeless outreach. He's been recognized by a lot of people, but that's not a police function, really. That's not something that, like you said, that you need, an officer that's trained in the way police officers are trained to respond to that. I think there's a lot of, drug abuse and drug addicted related calls, intoxicated people calls, that teams like this might be able to mitigate in a better way than law enforcement only. But it takes a little bit of a leap. You got to have that leap of faith to say that, not every time does that mean that someone's going to get beat up. And I think that's the concern, right? People are concerned about their safety, but to the Hart team's credit, they hit the ground running and they're ready to go. I think there's a lot of people out there that are willing to do that work. We've got officers that are willing to back them up if they need that. But I think those are some other areas that, that other people might be able to engage first. We talked about panhandlers. I think I talked about them with you. It's an issue, but is it an issue that somebody else can have a conversation with them first, before we have to get involved? Maybe if the person is, particularly belligerent or doesn't want to work with us, then, then maybe the law enforcement piece kicks in. But those are just some areas that I think we could think outside the box.
Let me ask you then, as a follow-up. I remember, I think it was last budget year, maybe year before, you told me that of all the calls for service, about 5% involved report of a weapon of some kind. Is there a comparable number? And if there's not a number, just sort of, I'd love your ballpark estimate. What percent of calls for service would you put in those categories that you just described? And I'm not going to hold you to this. I'm just kind of getting a general.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. All right. It's recorded that you're not going to hold me to.
Ballpark.
I would say a good quarter. I would be willing to say probably 25% of the calls that we go to now are calls that might be able to be mitigated by somebody else, at least initially, depending on how the call comes in. As I sit here and continue to think about it, there might be, I know there are some places that, minor car accidents are even looked at ahead of time. There is state mandated reporting requirements and things like that some officers have to do. But I would say my guess would be around 25%. Unfortunately, I think the 5% numbers of people armed has increased. If you look at the numbers of guns that were taken off the streets, if you look at the numbers of ghost guns that we've seen that we haven't seen before, people are printing guns with printers, which it doesn't even register in my head how that's possible. I do think that the percentage of calls that are dangerous are going up, which makes it more important that we take officers off the calls that might not be dangerous, because I'd rather have 2 or 3 of them respond to the dangerous ones, rather than having, one of them stuck on something that they don't necessarily have to deal with. But again, that's a bigger analysis that has to be undertaken at 9:30. It won't get done now. But I think that's something that needs to be looked at.
Thank you. The question, You said that the department's at 373. Did I hear you say that that's 100 short?
100 short, exactly, on the button.
So the ideal is 473.
Yes, I think our last staffing analysis put us at 475 if we wanted to continue doing policing the way that we did, which is all the community policing efforts, the faith-based efforts, the business district CSOs that we had, the walk beats, all of the things that really engage the police department with the community the way we want to be able to say that we're doing community policing the right way. That 475 was the number we were at then. I think it's still a good number. If we make it to 473, I'll be pretty happy.
Okay, I want to press you on that a little bit because you've heard me say many times before, our ratio of police to population is very, very, very high. I mean, we're one of the highest. We're more than double the median for cities our size. We're very high. And when I say that, I know you say, well, look, this is what we need. We're already short-staffed trying to do the things that we do. And I guess my question is, my comment / question is, maybe the things that we do or the way policing is done isn't right. And I'll give you a recent example. And I'd like you to comment on this, which is what is it called? The Crime Reduction Task Force, as I understand it's called. And actually, Councilwoman Hercules, her son took a video of this the other day where like 6 or 7 cruisers boxed in somebody in a car, like literally like surrounded them on the street. And then a whole bunch of officers came out and it was a tint violation. And I know that there's been a lot of complaints to the Civilian Review Board about similar practices that are for like literally a traffic violation. So that's all that, if that is the way we're doing policing, that suggests to me that maybe we're doing it wrong. And I would add, like, I look at similar cities, and here's my question. I don't want to just lecture. Like Springfield, Massachusetts, as an example, has a few more people than we have, but about the same. And similar crime rate, but where we have, 30 police per 10,000 residents. They have, I think, 25. To give you one example, Lansing, Michigan, similar population, much higher crime rate, and they have only 16 to our 30. Odessa, Texas, similar population, similar crime rate, 13. So what do they know that we don't know? Why are they able to do it with far fewer officers than we are? I mean, I can give you more examples too. What's special about us?
Yeah, I mean, I'll answer that in a couple of ways. Number one, I've looked at the numbers that you've given. I've looked at the other cities that you looked at, and I don't think that we're always comparing apples to apples with that. Number two, if you look at the staffing analysis, it doesn't look at just population. It doesn't look at just officer per call. It's a very, robust look at calls for service, need, downtime. What are those officers doing in that community? I go to a lot of community events and I go to a lot of meetings, and I see you at some of them. And I don't think you're going to go to Hyacinth's Marge meeting and hear them looking for officers to do less, be less present, and be less active. They are looking for the opposite. And this is a community that has asked for that. So I think that that you're in a bit of a minority when that's what you're looking for from the police department. People here like to see the police. Now, like I said, the staffing analysis can look at if you're just answering calls for service. For example, park and walks, 1014s. We want our officers to do a certain number of park and walks. We want them to get out of their car. We want them to engage with the community. So if they were going to answer 10 calls for service in a given night, their downtime might be X number of minutes down, because there is officer wellness. We want to make sure that our officers are not going from call to call to call for 8 hours, because then when they get to the last person in the 7 hour and 30 mark, they're going to be cranky, to be less than scientific. So if I want them to do 2 parking walks, and if I want them to do 2 directed patrols, and I want them to stop at a community meeting to engage with some folks, that is where the downtime analysis comes in, and that's part of the culture. That's part of the staffing analysis, is what are our cops doing with their time? What are those numbers of cops doing? How often are they off on calls? We have a high call volume here. For a city our size and for a city our populations, no question about it. Our crime rate, our violent crime rate, is high for a city our size and a city our population, has been for a long time. So to do the things that to create the police department that folks are looking for and deliver the services that people are looking for. We have some large scale events here that go on at the same time that some of those cities don't have. And so when you have to cover evening shift on a busy night, and you have to staff Xfinity, Civic Center, soccer. 1 year we had about 5 of those events going on at one time, and just about every one of us was here, all the way up through myself at that time as an assistant chief. We were all here working. You've got to look at all of that stuff to decide what size your PD is. Now, the crime reduction team was designed to address violent crime. What we're looking at in the last 18 months to 2 years are shootings. Our homicides are up. They're tasked with going and getting guns. When you look at the fact that we took 341 guns off the street last year, that was 75, I think, more than the year before. And that crime reduction team, one north and one south, 2 crime reduction teams, got the majority of those guns. 50% of those firearms came from automobiles. So when you see the crime reduction team, especially, and when you see them boxing somebody in, they're likely going after somebody. They know who's in that car. We use intelligence-led policing here. We're looking at hot places and hot individuals to try to make sure that we prevent the next shooting. And they're very successful in getting those guns, and they have been extremely successful in getting those guns, and they deal with some of the most violent people out there. So there is a balance between what we're asking for in law enforcement. I think it's been a tough balance in the last couple of years, right? But the majority of your colleagues and the majority of the people out there are looking for public safety. And there are a lot of different ways to do that. I think there's a lot of great programs out there. We just heard Kim Oliver, talk about a lot of them that could be very successful over time. But right now the numbers are up. And some of the stuff that we're doing is a direct result of that. A 150% increase in homicide arrests. You can't send one cop out there, to arrest somebody for homicide. So I am sensitive to over policing, but right now we're definitely not doing that. These cops are stepping up in a way that a lot of other community police officers are not stepping up. A lot of folks are stepping back. And a day doesn't go by that folks aren't asking for that. So I think there's some, just disagreement in philosophy there.
Indeed. I think you put your finger on it, though, when you said that my colleagues and people in this city are looking for public safety. And the trouble is that they want safety, and we give them police, and those things aren't exactly the same. And I just want to push back a little bit also on this idea that it's about call volume. Lansing, Michigan, I wasn't able to find call volume in all these cities, but Lansing, Michigan has more crime than us, and they have 73% of our calls per year. And I'll go back to 2020. I went back to 2019, so it's pre-pandemic. 73% of our calls, but 53% the number of police. Bridgeport, 90% of our calls, and 80% of the number of police. So even that, the math's not math in there. If what you're saying is that we have a lot of police because our police are doing a lot of things that aren't police things, okay, that's a fair answer. That makes sense. But I'm trying to understand how it is that all these other cities are doing it, I would say, better than us. But I'll keep it.
I'll leave it at this because I don't think we're going to agree on this. I will only say I also don't think they're doing it better than us. I think when you talk to the community about what they think of their police department in Hartford, and I don't mean to call out Bridgeport, but if you ask Bridgeport what they think of their police department, and maybe Council President Rosado can chime in about a community meeting that we went to with New Haven and Bridgeport and Waterbury, yes. We are in a different place and we are doing it right. And I'll leave it there. Yes.
Okay, fair enough.
And Councilman Mission, we will come back to the rest of your questions, but I have other council members that want to ask a couple of questions.
One more that's related.
Sure.
So just to follow up on that crime reduction task force question, Chief. So what happens, if I understand you correctly, is that they identify a person whom they know has some criminal activity or suspect, they have some history, and then they wait until the person does anything. Let's say it's a traffic violation, and then they come in heavy because they think this is a dangerous person, even though the violation is just a TINS violation. Is that how it works?
It's not usually just a TINS violation. It could be though. These folks, we have meetings every day after a shooting. Every morning we all get together and we talk about who the people are that could be involved in the next shooting, who the people are that could be the next victim, who the people are that could be the next shooter. We look at location, we look at ShotSpotter data, we look at a lot of data to see what's going on. Fishing with a spear and not a net is the way policing has moved. We do not want to throw a net over an entire neighborhood and inconvenience every person in there by pulling them over. So our conditions officers, our North and South crime reduction team officers, our vice intelligence and narcotics detectives, our community service officers, because a lot of times that some of the folks that we think might be the next victim or we think are teetering on the edge of criminal activity, it'll be our community service officer that approaches them, and it won't always be a car stop. And it'll be, look, hey, we've got services, we've got things that you can do. You're talking about one approach in a multifaceted approach that this department takes, including longevity and all the community partners. You know, you can definitely go out there and find a video of our officers having to, several officers having to respond to a call because of the danger level of the call. They know who's in that car, and that's the reason they respond that way.
It's a pretextual stop to create the need for a search, but I'll pass it to Council President.
Thank you, Councilman. And Chief, I'm glad that you brought up that meeting that we went to together, because I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, New Haven, Waterbury, and Bridgeport were there, and some representatives of Black Lives Matters, pastors. And when I left that meeting, I was extremely proud, not that I'm not proud of our police department, but extremely proud, and more proud of Chief Dodian, not because he's on the screen, but because he was there in our meeting when we heard some of the issues that were going on with other cities, major cities that were there. Chief Dodian and I looked at each other and said, we are in a pretty good place based on what we're hearing. So, you know, I just want to say that, and then I'll pass it on to Councilman Sanchez, that I support our police department. I support more officers. I am concerned about this summer compared to the 2 summers that we've had. And I'm going to say, and correct me if I'm wrong, Chief, these flash mobs that we had, in this, and I'm going to talk about the south end of Hartford, where I had elderly people that were going, individuals that were going to church at 10 o'clock in the morning, where they could not leave their homes because their streets were blocked. I also remember at 12 o'clock at midnight, I got in my car because I wanted to see this for myself. Officer Barrett got injured. Our officers were working overtime, and I don't know if you can shed some light how many hours without sleeping to keep our city safe. Had we had our full capacity of our police department, our officers would not have to go through that. They are human beings like we are. They are fathers, mothers, parents, son. They are human beings. And sometimes I hear different individuals speak out in the community who, for instance, think that these men who protect and serve us are some sort of robots. They are not. So I encourage this council body to work with our police department to not compare us with other cities, but to say, hey, how can we work together? Let's sit at the table. Let's find solutions so that we can move forward. And I find that a lot in these meetings and in departments that we're always being compared to other cities, other states. We need to work on what's best for Hartford. With that said, Councilman Sanchez, you have the floor.
Thank you through you, Madam Chair. Good evening, Chief Doty. I don't have any questions. I don't have any questions on the budget, but I do have a statement. And Council President Rosado basically, stated just about everything I want to state. But I also want to share that as not only a councilman, but a father and a grandfather here in the city of Hartford, and my neighbors, my constituents, they're constantly calling me, and this is for Councilman Mictum. Now, I'm not sure you receive the same information from your constituents, but they're constantly asking me, where is HPD? Constantly asking, where's HPD? 3 houses right next to mine, a woman was shot. Her pocketbook was stolen. Around the corner, an elderly lady around 70 years old, at gunpoint, her vehicle was taken right from her driveway. And this is going on throughout the city. The North End is just as bad. Homicides up. They're shooting just about every day. And we don't have enough officers to cover it. We can't expect an officer to be on every corner of every block. We can't expect an officer to come racing down for a simple robbery versus a gunshot or a victim of some sort. So, you know, I'm always being questioned, where's HPD? We need to hire more. And your comparison to these other towns or cities, and maybe the capital or, you know, equivalent to our population, it sounds to me that the crime rate is high, but the staff is low. And most likely it's high because they don't have enough officers themselves. But here in Hartford, I'm born and raised here. I have my family, I have my friends, I have my neighbors, and I have my constituents. I completely, and you know this, and everyone knows this, I support our Hartford Police Department 100%. They've been doing a tremendous job. Now, in the past, that's the past, right? We need to correct and move forward to better ourselves. This Heart team, did I say it right, Chief? Heart team?
Yes.
Okay. This Heart team is a huge beneficial tool that's finally been created. And as the chief has been straight and honest with you, this 25% of the calls affects having someone from a Heart team to be present rather than a police officer. So there's a combination and a partnership here. And to Council President Rosado's point, we need to start working with the police department to help them get better, create a better relationship, which in my opinion, they've been doing this so far, but we all need to be on board to create that relationship and partnership with our community. And that's all. I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Madam President.
Councilman Gale?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good evening, Chief. And thank you for that presentation. A couple of things, just to pick up on the last comment. I tend to be a statistics guy, and I've heard these comparisons before that we heard a moment ago, comparing Hartford to other cities. And Chief, you're absolutely right. They're not apples to apples comparison. And I just pulled up real quickly, Lansing, Michigan, the standard metropolitan statistical area, which is the measure of the metropolitan population around Lansing, is 541,000 people. The standard metropolitan statistical area around Hartford is over 1.2 million. So the metropolitan area that you're policing is much more than twice the size of Lansing, Michigan. And I suspect we could do the same analysis for Springfield, Massachusetts, and any other city. At the end of the day, I don't think it's a fair statement that Hartford has dramatically more police per person if you're taking into account what else is happening in Hartford. The fact that, you know, we're the capital city, we're sitting here with all the hospitals, we're sitting here with all the entertainment venues, we're sitting here with all the people that are coming in and out of the city. This is the kind of thing that used to drive, still drives me crazy. My auto insurance rates are higher than everybody else around here because there's so many other cars on our streets all day long. It doesn't have anything to do with my driving, but it does have to do with the density of the numbers of people that are in Hartford. So anyway, that's my little comment on that. I don't think we have too many. In fact, to your Hyacinth Yenny and her NRZ comment, I have a very similar comment. I hear, as Councilman Sanchez does, and others, I hear all the time from people concerned that they don't feel safe walking around our city. They don't feel safe in large part, because there are innumerable cars driving around that have tinted windows. You can't see, can't make eye contact with anybody. You have people who are ignoring all traffic signaling, not stopping at stop signs, they're not stopping at traffic lights. They're not observing the rules of the road. Countless times it's happened to me where people, I'm stopping at a light and a guy goes around the left of me into the travel lane and takes a right-hand turn then in front of me. So my question is, what thoughts do you have? What thoughts does HPD, what is HPD looking at to attempt to try to address some of these? I mean, I don't know to the extent that some of these things are COVID related, if people got used to fewer cars on the street and they could just willy-nilly disobey traffic laws because nobody was looking. But, you know, I'm out there, I ride a bicycle around this town. It's dangerous. People walking, it's dangerous. What can we look to HPD? What can you tell us that you know, you may be able to do to try to start to get some of this stuff back under control?
Yeah, and I wish, Councilman Miguel, I wish that you know, I had one answer. You know, I think that, you know, like Council President has said, and you know, Councilman Sanchez said, and you said, and Councilman Mictum as well has said, I think, you know, sitting around the table and having these, you know, discussions, meaningful discussions with one another about ideas. I mean, I don't have all the ideas. One thing I can tell you is that we saw statewide significant reductions in moving safety violation enforcements during COVID. We saw, you know, courts close. We saw traffic courts closed. People could have accumulated 2, 3, 4 tickets before they had to have their day in court or pay a fine. And I think I live in the city also, and I can tell you, on the city streets, on the highways, the traffic was insane. I mean, people are driving with reckless disregard for safety, and I think it's a direct relation to is it the best solution to have traffic enforcement from law enforcement? No, I think there's other ones. And I think even this, you know, this council body's talked about things like, you know, red light cameras and environmental changes to the way the streets are designed and how easy it is to speed. You know, I know we've talked about speed tables, and that gets into an issue with the fire department. There's no one that can tell you that it's a simple answer. But I do think that enforcement on core moving violations is what we can do right now. That is what our officers are doing. We have our grants that the Department of Transportation has acknowledged the Hartford Police Department as one of the most proactive police departments when it comes to safety, DUI checkpoints, OUI checkpoints, core moving violations, stop signs, stop lights. You know, there are other things that we pull people over for, but that is 85% of our traffic enforcement and traffic tickets are core moving violations. And when we saw a lot of these, you know, a lot of the numbers statewide, state police, you can look at the racial profiling study, but all the stops have to be reported. And I was shocked to see how many tickets, how much safety violation enforcement, and the state police aren't giving out parking tickets on the highway. They're giving out tickets for speeding and things that cause fatal motor vehicle accidents. How much those were reduced in the last couple of years because of COVID. Officers not wanting to interact with people through their windows for both their safety and the officer safety. You know, I think that it's been the perfect storm. Like you said, Councilman, you know, less cars on the road, easier to speed through the streets with less people there. You know, downtown, you know, between my apartment and the PD, I have to go right through downtown. And, you know, it's noticed. We are, you know, gaining traction again. The courts are reopening. There are some, you know, there is some, you know, level of repercussions for that kind of behavior now. The grants have started flowing again, the distracted driving grants, the OUI grants, the seatbelt grants, you know, all that stuff. And as you've seen, you know, the city has taken on some serious projects where they're changing the design, the environmental design of the streets to slow traffic down. And I think the combination of all that is probably the answer. There's probably not one thing that you can do.
Well, thank you. Just picking up on one of the comments you made, the red light cameras, which certainly strikes me as total non-discriminatory policing. Car either does or doesn't go through a red light. There's no judgment call to be made by a human being as to who's being pulled over. But my understanding is we don't have the authority in Hartford to start utilizing red light cameras. That will require some state authorization. I'm just wondering what you and other police chiefs would around the state, where you guys are weighing in with the legislature in getting us the enabling legislation to bring these things into Hartford.
So I haven't weighed in that much. I am the 5 weeks in here with 270 law enforcement officers, executive level law enforcement officers from across the country and in the world. And I don't know that there's any one thing that, I think you have to look at your community. You have to look at what those cameras have done in other communities, because, so on its face saying that, that red light cameras are non-discriminatory because you either go through light or you don't is one thing, but how you police or enforce in a community of color, in a community that has socioeconomic issues, I think that's a bigger issue. And I wouldn't weigh in and give my support or not until I really, sat down with some people that are a lot smarter than me, that looked at those ramifications. Because the last thing that you want to do as a police department, and I think red light cameras would be considered an arm of the police department, right? The authority to give a ticket would somehow have to come through us, I think. I would want to make sure that we're not doing harm. And I wouldn't be comfortable supporting it until I was sure that we weren't doing harm. So I think it'd be a bigger conversation. But, for right now, we're using the tools that we have at our disposal.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Sure, and Councilman Gill, I strongly urge that you sit in our meetings. As you know, we put together a red light task force, and it's composed by members of the community from various districts throughout the city of Hartford. So I'm really looking forward to having those conversations. We do also have a representative from the NAACP and the UCLA. With that said, does anyone have any other budget questions for our chief? Because I feel like we're in a public safety committee. I've seen more public safety committee comments and concerns.
I do, and I know I don't have my camera on. And now you're frozen.
On this budget process that I have in the meeting, Councilwoman Surgeon, I think you're frozen.
Am I frozen?
Now you're back.
Oh, jeez. Okay. No, I just have a comment. Chief, my condolences on the loss of your dad. I don't know how you're doing it, to be honest with you, being away, continuing the program. So lots of respect, sir.
You met Vicky. That's how.
Pardon?
You met Vicky. That's the only way I can do it.
Gotcha.
She's holding it down.
Yeah. All right. So we're good. All right. Yeah. No, Vicky. Just then maybe one or through you, Madam Chair, one of the things that the chief mentioned, and I know you haven't started, you just started the HEART program, so you don't really have a lot of data. So I'm hoping maybe in a year from now, with the calls being responded by other teams to the number of, to see how much your police officer calls are actually decreased. That's going to be interesting to actually see. So some analysis I'm looking forward to in another year from now. I think you just graduated a class last year. I think everybody's coming online now, Chief. Is that correct?
We have a class graduating in next week on May 13th.
Next week? Okay.
And then we had one that graduated earlier this year. I had the date, but yeah, we've got them going in back to back.
So that will bring you up to how much from the 375, from the 373 you have now?
We will be at, I think that class has got 13 or 14 in it. So that'll bring us up into the 385-ish range.
Okay. So with
And we have constant recruitments. So we have
Yeah.
another recruitment that's going on right now. So that class will start right after this one. But the problem is that we're hiring everybody off the list that passes all the tests that are required by the state. And we used to, so like when I got hired, the certification list that would come would have 200 names on it, right? So if in the budget year you wanted to hire 30 officers, they would take, the top 30 people off that list of 200, put them in the academy, and then the next 30 people from the remaining list and put them in the academy. Right now, we're putting through everybody that passes and meets the standards, and we're getting classes between 15 and 20, sometimes 25, and that's a problem everyone is seeing. It is the number one thing talked about down here in this program is recruitment retention.
So I hear you said in your presentation that you may be going back out for this coming summer, a small walk beat back again, because, I've complimented you over the last year when we had the walk beat here on Albany Avenue, and it was working really well. The community really, was responding to having that walk beat. So in your presentation, you say you may go back to that on a limited basis?
Yeah, I think, like I said, we have to do a little of everything. We can't just give up on any one area of things that have made us successful as a department and as a city and as a community. So even though, we do have to address, on certain nights, and we have the data to show us when we really have to be aggressive going after, guns in certain areas and people in certain areas. There are other nights where we have to get back to, walking around, and you have a couple great CSOs up in the north end. You got Montanez and Alpha Filge, and they're gonna be back on the bicycles this summer. Those guys enjoy that, and so we are going to sprinkle that in. That is part of the plan, because honestly, we know we can't enhance public safety by ourselves. And the more people that we're talking to and the more information that we're getting and the more we're working with the community, the better we're going to be at that. So though it is important that those officers get out there and do that. And I talked about the park and walks, and we're going back to doing those in the summer. And so we're going to do as much of that as we can.
Okay. And just two more questions through you, Madam Chair. You had also mentioned that your police officers are going through mental health recertification. When would that be completed?
Well, so we're the vendor for that is out to RFP. That's part of the police accountability bill, is to do mental health wellness checks every so often for your officers. So so we're hoping to have that implemented. The RFP process, a lot will depend on how many responses they get and how extensive they have to do to evaluate. That process is underway. I'm hoping within a couple months we'll have a vendor selected and we'll be up and running.
Okay. And in your presentation, I think you said, so total of all grants received was $1.4 million?
1.8. That's the cops hiring grant. But remember that the 500,000 over 3 years is not in that number because it just hasn't been given us yet. We were awarded the grant, but we don't have the number yet. So, and some of those grants, when you look at the budget book, you'll see the grant that we get for Click It or Ticket. Some of those things, they come in after budget season, so they don't always make that book until the next year. Okay. So we are going to continue to get those grants. We are working on now a second grant. A little bit of a spoiler alert, but that revolves around the non-fatal shooting team and violent crime that looks at it from a technology side to see if there's any enhancements that we can do with our camera system and ShotSpotter and all the technology things that we have going for us, because we do know that technology is a force multiplier. It's never going to replace the cop that'll answer the call for service, but that technology piece is a force multiplier. So we're working on a grant application to try to get another competitive grant to go after some technology that's going to help us in that world as well.
So, but Chief, you remember we've been talked over the years regarding being proactive and you know, you've got your statistics and you know where things may potentially happen over the next, you know, the upcoming spring, summer. What plans do you have in place to address those, you know, whatever issues we may have from the statistics that you have garnered over the last year or two?
So that I mentioned the summer safety plan.
Yep.
We're working on like a public facing document for that just kind of gives an overview of what that plan entails. That plan is very specific. It talks about when the officers work, what shifts, what hours, what days. We don't put that out publicly. And that is all kind of generated from the data that we have, from ShotSpotter data, from basically all the technologies and all the human intelligence that we have about crime in the city. It's what puts our cops, you know, we've removed, you know, hot spots where it used to be maybe a 4 or 5 block area that we said, hey, try to concentrate your efforts in here. And we've narrowed that down to addresses and small series of addresses where, you know, we can be a little bit more predictive.
Great. And just one last question, Madam Chair. We have talked, Chief, over the last couple of years regarding, you know, when you're driving, it tells you how fast you're going. I don't know what do you call it.
The signs?
You know, it registered how fast you're driving.
Yeah, those signs that we put out.
Yeah, we were talked about you getting some extra ones and doing something, putting more out there so people can, you know, see how fast they're driving. Did you put all of that in your budget or anything?
We did. We bought some extra ones, and then we also have had some problems getting our hands on those. Apparently there's a lot of computer chips in those, and the chain of you know, the availability of that has not been great, to be honest with you. So, but we do have more of them out there. And that's something that I get calls from all the time from members of council and from members of the public. If you got an area where you'd like to see one of those things sit for a little while, give us a call and we'll put it out there for a week, 2 weeks. It does have an effect, not on everyone. Some people are going to speed by it, but it does have an impact. So feel free to let us know if you've got a good idea about where to put it. We've got a running list. We try to hit everywhere where people ask.
Okay, great. Thank you, Chief. And again, you know, my heart goes out to you and your family. And thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Councilwoman Hercules, you have the floor.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. Good evening, Chief, and thank you for your presentation and deep condolences for the loss of your dad as well. I was just curious, a couple questions. Who was hired as the project manager for Project Longevity?
Mark Manson.
Okay, and is Mr. Manson's salary coming from the US DOJ, or is he part of your actual operational budget from the department?
I believe that salary comes out of OPM. I think that's a state funded position. Doesn't come out of me.
Okay. All right. One of the things I'm curious in terms of data and predictive, you know, using data to do predictive measures, when the budget increases and the department increases, do we see a decrease in crime? Have we seen that?
It's been hard to say here. I mean, I think, you know, some of the most, you know, the most profound experiments in that have probably come out of New York City, and the changes in crime that occurred there when they made that police department massive, you know, one of the largest police agencies in the world, and the incredible reduction in crimes that they saw there. You know, some of that stuff worked out well for a period of time, and then, you know, as other things, you know, evolved, I think they went in different directions. But, you know, I think generally speaking, that's probably the best example of that. I don't know that we've ever been able to get to a place where, you know, where we could make an analysis that that's the case here. You know, we thought we were going to have this 5-year period where we were going to be able to grow as a department and get back up towards that 475 number. We did not anticipate the you know, the losses that we've had in officers to other departments. So it'd be hard to say. I can tell you that in talking to residents, certainly the perception of crime, which is a key element beyond the statistics, changes with the number of police officers. I mean, when I had 24 walk beats out there, I heard about it. I got calls about it every day. People felt safer. They love seeing the cops out there in the streets and, interacting with people. Those walk beats were out there for a reason. They were out there to build relationships. They handled a couple calls for service, when it happened right in their area, but most of their work was proactive, checking doors, letting people know that, their back door was unlocked or their dog was barking, basically taking care of calls before they happened and doing community policing. So I can tell you, from my experience in talking with people, science, not scientific, that's the perceptions I get.
That's fair. I mean, I get the perception, but the numbers seem to kind of trend the same year after year for the most part, even with increases in the budget.
Listen, you 100% have to do the right thing with the cops that you have, right? So, I think that there were times, I've been here for 26 years. I've seen, I think, 7 chiefs. And I think there are times where we had a good amount of cops and all they did was answer calls for service. I don't think that's the way I manage the department. And, my pledge is that that's not the way I'd manage the department. But I do think when you combine, probably the most recent example of it was when Chief Harnett was here from New York City. And again, I go back to that New York City theory, and there was a book about it. If you manage your personnel correctly and you have the right number of personnel to do the things that you want to do, you can impact both the perception of crime and actual crime.
In your presentation earlier, you mentioned a couple of things that, a more holistic view of what public safety is. You mentioned calls that involve mental health, addiction, homelessness, and things that are really outside of the purview of the police department. And you also mentioned balance, which I would agree is important. And I think my frustration doesn't come so much solely from your work, because I do understand its importance. I think the lack of balance is what maybe frustrates me and constituents that I speak to, where we see, police budget increasing incrementally and knowing that that's not the only answer to public safety, and seeing those other areas of public safety either being reduced or not funded further to their full capacity. So housing inspectors to make sure people have a safe place to live and aren't ending up homeless, programming for the youth, education. And so while I do understand those are much longer term investments and emotional responses, when something bad happens, we want to call the police, that is just not the only answer. And so I appreciate that you do have a wider perspective of public safety, and maybe if we can continue talking about that with council about how we can have a more balanced budget that addresses and identifies those other areas that equal public safety that also need investments as well.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, like I said, I think that when people don't have anyone else to call, they call the police, and that's how we have gotten ourselves as a profession into some tough places where, officers weren't the right answer, but they were the only answer. So they showed up without the right tools, without the right training, without the right ability to mitigate a problem long term. I mean, how many times did we've seen situations where police officers have dealt with the same person over and over again that had substance abuse issues, mental health issues, you name it. And it ended up tragic, or someone got hurt, and it didn't need to be that way. Someone else could have intervened in that and had a better outcome because they had more time to dedicate to it. The other thing too is, if you call the police 5 times, you might see 5 different officers that didn't know what happened the day before. So having these folks that have, more familiarity with these expertise, I totally agree with it. Now, where I'm an advocate, for my department and what I think is right for my department, and what I think my department can do for the community. My budget is going to increase because I'm losing cops to neighboring towns that are paying a significant amount more than me. It's not even just about numbers of cops. It's about, the profession and what, the standard is. And the standard is raised for benefits, for pay, for all those things. So while I do agree with you, I don't agree that money comes out of policing. I don't want, I think that's not a balanced approach. I think you've got to build up everything and not take from one and give to the other. Now, sometimes there's only so much money in the kitty. I get that, but that's, I think, a balanced approach.
Okay, we can agree to disagree on that one, but thank you.
Councilwoman Hercules, I'm sorry, are you done with your questions?
I am, thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Sanchez, you had another question? Or a comment?
Yeah, I'll just try to make it quick. So my question is this: has there been any conversation on a block watch or a similar program, or is this discouraged due to the high number of illegal gun possessions? And unfortunately, I don't have my detailed budget, but is there a line item for such a program?
No, there's no line item for a program like that. They don't, a block watch doesn't tend to cost a lot of money. It takes a little bit of organization. We've talked about it in a couple neighborhoods where people have been interested. You just have to be careful. Remember, we've had some tragedies in this country that have stemmed from block watches where, people have ultimately decided to, carry guns and take the law into their own hands. And I think you just, that there's programs out there where you can encourage community engagement, where people are walking shoulder to shoulder with officers, or where there's some degree of oversight. The Citizen Police Academy is a good start. And then people take some of those philosophies back out into the community and start groups, that are maybe NRZ based. I think the block watch is a bit of an outdated thing, only because you can't control where it goes. But community involvement, different story. I mean, when you think about when we had some indications that our Riverfest was going to be a problem, and we had peace builders on every corner with cops, and men stand up against violence with every cop, and we had a Mother's United Against Violence. It was a chilly night, and they were out there on every corner that we thought we might have issues, and it worked great. If we could get that to happen more often, I think that's about us working together.
I remember that year. It was a great summer. We had 5-6 events on one night.
Yeah, it was huge.
Very successful.
It was a huge success.
Right.
We found food, and we did little little events where folks could eat. Literally gave people something to do other than cause problems, and it worked. So, but can you sustain that? And that's, I think, a funding issue that Councilwoman Hercules and Councilman Mictum talked about.
Councilman Sanchez, are you all set? I'm sorry, everyone just froze, and I think it's my internet.
Yes. So I'm all set, and before I stop speaking, my condolences once again. Sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
Okay, and as I promised, Councilman Mixton, we're back to you.
Thank you. Actual budget questions. I'm going to try hard, I promise. How many dogs are in the Canine unit now?
Patrol Canine unit. What's that?
It was 12 last year, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, so I'll probably have to answer that on email, unless Laura or one of you folks has the actual number, because remember, we've got patrol dogs. I think we have 3 of those out in patrol, 3 or 4. We have the narcotics dogs. We have a firearm dog when folks discard weapons. We have a dog that can go out and sniff that. Those are predominantly like labs. The narcotics dogs, the firearms dogs, the bomb accelerant dogs. And those are the majority of our dogs. I want to say there's probably like 8 of those, but Laura, one of you guys knows.
Yeah, the number is still 12, and you're right. It's I think 3 in patrol, 1 in VIN, and the rest are either bomb or other kinds of sniffing dogs. So still 12.
And those are all dogs with people in plain clothes. That they're those are detective dogs. They're not out in a patrol car.
The narcotics dogs, are they? Let me put it this way: have you had to get rid of dogs now that marijuana is legalized?
Haven't had to do that. Their training has adapted, so we haven't had to get rid of them. I don't. I mean, obviously, when it comes to marijuana, their use is certainly limited. So.
Yeah, and the breakdown is, I'm sorry, 6 patrol style dogs, 2 bomb dogs, 2 drug dogs, 1 gun dog, and 1 arson dog.
So the dogs that used to alert to many kinds of drugs now will alert to not marijuana?
I'm an expert in a lot of things. Drug detection dogs are not one of them. I can get you an answer for that from that is a very, I don't understand how they, the gun dog can find a gun either, but they alert in different ways. They're on, food recognition. It's amazing the way they train these dogs, but I don't know the particulars about how they differentiate or select certain drugs that they can alert to and certain ones that they don't. But I can certainly get an emailed response to you.
And last question on dogs, I promise. Do you know, or does the department have their accuracy rate?
Their what?
Accuracy rate. How often do they give false?
The dogs?
Yeah, the dogs.
I don't. That'd be something we'd have to ask them as well.
I would love to know. And then a couple questions on something else entirely. When we passed the CPRB ordinance, whatever time at the beginning of COVID that was, part of that was that the Inspector General was supposed to be able to have access to all the same records that the Internal Affairs Division has access to. And I know that's been a problem in the sense that he hasn't gotten the right logins to be able to just get access to that. Is that problem solved?
I have a meeting with the COO and with the Inspector General on that. The areas of the department that he can have unrestricted access to, he has that. But there are some legal concerns. We have collect an NCIC information. There is redacted information inside of our records management systems on domestic violence calls where certain information has to be redacted before it can be released, sexual assaults, juvenile matters. So we are working through that like many things that are new. This was something that was just brought to my attention, and I have a meeting with the IG and COO to try to figure that out.
And last question. I know this is partly a union issue, but putting the union part aside, would you support allowing the Inspector General to directly ask questions of officers during investigations instead of just sitting there while IAD asks questions?
So we've been dealing with these questions kind of as they come up. We knew there'd be some growing pains with this. The original request.
Your position is on that.
I'm answering.
Okay, go ahead.
There are some questions that have a legal nature, much like the IG's access to our records management system. The same situation here. We're dealing with corporation counsel on, the last thing that I want to do is end up in a situation where an officer has, been guilty of misconduct, and during the course of some rush to judgment that I made because, you want me to answer this question right now, that person gets away with it, that I lose that case in court, or that, that it goes to the labor board and we lose it. So I've been certainly open, as I was when I kind of helped, push the CPRB thing along and give advice on how I thought it would work. I think it's a good process, but I think there's a lot of technicalities now that go into that process that involve, employee rights. It involves, there's a lot there. And frankly, I'm not qualified to answer some of those questions. That's why there's attorneys. And so we are working through those. I am in support of an independent process, that looks at these citizen complaints, that is legal and that is not going to impact, our ability to manage the department as far as, losing something under challenge. These are issues that are being addressed by corporation counsel, myself, and with the IG. He's been very much a gentleman. I've had many great conversations with him. And I think we'll be able to work all these things out, but we're going to do it the right way, and it'll be legal.
So the answer to that question is you're not sure yet. I'm just trying to understand. Like,
I'll wait for that. I'm going to wait for that process to come out and wait for people to give me the facts on what we can and can't do. And then if there is a risk in there, they will give me, as they always do, what the risks are on both sides, and we will have to make a decision. I think that the CPRB was well intended. I think it's, it's set up well, but there's a lot of intricate things here that, when you deal with unions and you deal with employee rights, that, I have to have all that information in front of me before I give an opinion on it and before I make a decision on it.
When do you think that'll happen?
Right when I get all that information.
That's cute. Have a nice. I'm all set, Council President.
Are there any other questions? Councilman Mishtam, what was your last comment?
I said that's cute. I asked him when. He said right as soon as it happens.
I think that's out of order. I think that's out of order. I think he answered the question, and I'm going to respectfully ask you to refrain from those comments when addressing any department head. I think that comment is out of order. Thank you. Are there any other comments or questions for the chief? There being none, Chief, thank you so much for presenting this evening. Again, my condolences to you and your family. A high five to Vicky. We appreciate you and we thank you. And with that said, this council meeting is, not council meeting, this OMBGA committee meeting is under recess until tomorrow, May 4th at 5:30. Where we will hear, I apologize, I'm tired, where we will hear budget presentations from Health and Human Services, Internal Audit, and the Human Resource Department. So with that said, we are in recess until tomorrow. Everyone have a good night and thank you.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.